I'm Emilie Lunt, and I believe with my whole heart and soul that our homes are places where we can seek and love the truth, celebrate beauty, and learn good things every single day. That's why I'm educating my kids at home, and I know you can do it too. Welcome to Heart and Soul Homeschool. Well, I'm excited to introduce you to my guests today. We've got Ricky and Autumn Sands, and Ricky is the pastor at the First Baptist Church of Weston, Missouri, and Autumn, his wife, is a homeschool mom, and she leads the co-op at their church. So welcome, you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. It's an honor. It's a joy. So
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a fun connection. So the training director, Sadie, for the Herzog Foundation, she does amazing work putting on trainings for Christian schools and homeschool co-ops throughout the year. 100, I think she said they were doing this year. So it's just incredible the work she does. But she actually attends your church. And so I was talking to her a few weeks ago, and she mentioned that you guys had a homeschool co-op at your church. And I was like, I need to meet these people. So she connected us, and here we are. So I've been looking forward to this over the last few weeks, getting together and talking today. So before we jump in, just tell us a little bit about yourselves and your family and what you do, if you would.
Yeah.
Great. You go first.
You want me to go first? All right. Well, yeah. So I am the pastor of First Baptist Church of Weston, Missouri. We're about 25 minutes, I think, from the studio here. And so homeschool dad and husband to Autumn, and coffee aficionado, I guess you could say, coffee connoisseur. So,
Yes.
but yeah, that's
Very well-rounded.
That's right.
Yes.
So,
And my name is Autumn, wife to Ricky, beneficiary of the coffee aficionado, for sure. And then, we have 3 kids. Our 4th is on the way. He will be born in early September, late
September-ish.
August.
Right up,
Yeah, we'll see if we make it to September. And then, new title is the director and founder of our co-op. So it's
you guys
exciting.
have a lot going on. This
Yeah.
is a busy time.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to learn more about it. So tell us how you became a homeschool family. Autumn, you and I got to chat on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and you kind of told me the story. You are a homeschool kid, right?
Yes. So homeschooling was kind of always just on my mind because I was homeschooled. I just had a passion for it. I had some homeschooling in my upbringing. I also went to a private school as well, but just always was passionate about homeschooling, and just felt before we ever even had kids that it was something that I wanted to explore with our kids.
So you had a good experience, and it was, different probably then from the
yeah.
resources that you have now.
Oh,
and
yeah.
talk about that just a little bit, because I imagine for your mom,
Yeah, well, it was way
it was
different.
a different process.
Yeah, way different. In the early 90s, it was just, catalogs that sent to your house. There was maybe 3 to 5 different choices, where there was just hundreds of curriculum choices now. We did Abeka growing up because that's just the flagship, in the 90s.
It really was, and in Christian schools too. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
went to public school, but to Christian school for a while, and we had a Becca curriculum.
Same.
So when I started homeschooling and I saw a Becca, I was like, I
I
know that.
Yes.
So
Same.
that's an oldie but goodie.
Oh, yeah, same. Whenever we changed from homeschooling into the private school, it was a very small private school, and they used the Becca curriculum.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a huge shift from what we were currently already doing.
Yeah, that works out. And so Ricky, what about you?
Oh, well, I had no context for homeschooling until we got married. And so I grew up public schooled. I went to 3 different public schools. And then we settled in a little town in northwest Missouri, where I went from 3rd grade on to a public school there. And so it wasn't until really college when I met Autumn that I had any kind of context for homeschooling. And so maybe outside of the caricatures and stereotypes that I heard, growing up. But
Which I think, honestly, everybody probably has those a little bit. I know
Right.
there was a family at our church when I was growing up that homeschooled, and they were just absolutely the stereotype of the denim jumpers, kind of socially awkward, that kind of thing. But I think it's amazing now
How much
that's changed.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think people kind of joke about that now, but that transition maybe is a little bit easier, right?
yeah, for sure.
When you think about now, it's not as stark maybe when you
yeah.
picture a homeschool family versus just
Sure.
a quote unquote normal family,
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
especially in the last, I'd say, few years since COVID, it seems like there's been a huge boom in homeschooling, home education, seeing this as an option. And so I think some of those stereotypes are definitely lesser than they used to be.
Yeah, which can only be to the good, right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah,
it's really a beautiful way to educate your children. And, at the Herzog Foundation, we support all kinds of Christian education, and which I think is really great, because sometimes, there can be a little bit of tension between those who choose private Christian school and homeschool, but we just seek to cheerlead everybody who wants to disciple their kids. I know you guys are passionate. We'll talk more about that. But Autumn, when we chatted before, you told me the story of your co-op, and I think it's really sweet how it started and what it's turned into. Can you kind of give us a little background?
Sure. So when our co-op started, it looked way different than what it does now. When we first started, it was 3 families, and we're trying to get our kids together basically on a weekly basis. Our kids were all very young. I think our oldest at the time was in 2nd grade. And so it just kind of looked like 4 to 5 kids around a kitchen table. We did some kind of art project or science project, and then our kids would just go outside and play in the backyard of the house that we were meeting at. And then just quickly, we just grew and grew and grew. Within the first month of meeting, we acquired another family. So then it was 4 families for quite a few months meeting at this house. And then we decided that it would be fun to go sing Christmas carols at nursing homes and rehab facilities around our area. So we started meeting at the church to practice singing. And when we started meeting there, we acquired probably 2 or 3 more families at this time. And so by this time we
were just kind of word of mouth.
We were growing word of mouth, only word of mouth.
It's still to this day, it's just word of mouth.
And so we decided that around this time we couldn't go back to a house. Our plan was to only just meet at the church through Christmas, through practicing and rehearsing these songs, partially because Ricky was helping us sing, and also just the space for practicing something like that. But then after Christmas, we decided that that's really when we needed to have our co-op take more of a shape and have policies and procedures.
Kind of formalize.
Formalize things. And so that's when we decided that we would call it Aiming Arrows.
Yeah, the Aiming Arrows Academy.
I love that. From the scripture, right?
Yes, from Psalm 127.
And
so we just sort of created all of that. And then from that point, honestly, we've just grown even more. Now we have around 20-ish families. We've lost some from the very beginning stages. People, just come and go. But we've gained a lot more families, and I think we're around 20 families right now and a little bit over 40 kids.
That's
which
amazing.
Is crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And so now we have more of a structure. We come in, we sing every day, and we have little programs throughout the year, and then the kids break up into their classes, and we do different projects each week, and they just kind of build on each other, and it's awesome.
That's an amazing story. So I'm actually going to back you up a little bit, because when we talked before, you told me that you were meeting in this woman's home because she had a baby or a toddler that napped in the afternoon. And I thought that was such a sweet thing, because I think that sometimes, and while your co-op has grown and there is a sweetness to that, sometimes we just need that little bit of fellowship, right? And that small group of friends. And so I think that it's important for us to realize that homeschool community can look a lot of different ways.
100%.
And so I just thought that was really neat that this woman opened her home and it fit her family's needs. And for a time, that was what was needed. And then it just blossomed into this other thing. But I think that's really neat. And I think sometimes we might tend to overlook just those little sweet opportunities.
100%.
So I just thought that would be encouraging. So one of the things that we hear from homeschoolers who are trying to start new groups is that it's really challenging to find space to meet. And so you kind of had an inside track on this one, having Ricky be the pastor of the church. Ricky, talk to us a little bit about that, because one thing that we hear a lot is that churches are really hesitant to host homeschool groups, which is kind of counterintuitive to me, honestly. But we hear this whole list of reasons why it just can't work. As a pastor, give us a little insight what that was like bringing this group into your church.
Yeah. So, Well, let me just give you, our church's mission statement is that, First Baptist Church of Weston exists for the kingdom and for the community. And so, by the time Aiming Arrows grew to be what it was, our church had really been trying to live out this mission as a church for a while. And so part of that being for the community was recognizing that, your church's address is not an accident. And so, and I'm stealing this from a guy named Mark Clifton, who's big into church revitalization through the North American Missions Board, but he would always say that the church should better the quality of life for the community that it's in. And I really resonated with that and agreed with that, because it does seem that a lot of it's fear, right? Oh, well, what if something gets broken? Can we absorb that cost? Or what about insurance? What if we get sued? I mean, there's a million different tracks that you can go down.
People who might go to public school or teach in the public schools is a big one we hear.
Yeah, so you have that, and there's just a million different reasons to not do it. But we as a church had devoted ourselves to this. We're going to be a church that's for this community, and this was. So by the time that we were going to meet in the church, I actually didn't really present it much to the congregation. I have great leadership, and the deacons at the time, and the rest of leadership. I just said, hey, this is a growing need in our community, which we were completely blown away. I mean, we live in a town of 1,700 people, and to have such a large homeschool presence was really surprising to us. We didn't think that the co-op would grow into be what it was, and now we've reached outside of Weston, right?
Sure.
Like we're kind of in the Platte County region.
Yeah. Well, let's
sure.
talk, because so we all live in the Kansas City metro area, and so I don't know, would you call Weston kind of like a bedroom community to the Kansas City area?
That's exactly what it is.
And it's a cute little historic, lots of Lewis and Clark history, and so it's a destination for day trippers, and so but it itself is a rather small town, like you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
And so that definitely gives a unique spin on this, because it would be surprising. I was surprised when I found about the growth of your co-op within that small of a community, which I think is just a testament to what is going on in our culture, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as there has been such a growth, I think, in homeschooling being seen as an actual option for families that are considering stepping away from a public or government school option, that need is definitely increased in Platte County and in Weston. Many of the families that go to our co-op are members of our church, and they live right here in Weston. And like you said, it's a bedroom community, and so a lot of people, we're just far enough off the highway. We have that rural feel, but we're also close enough to the highway that you can commute to Kansas City for work, right? And so. So as it continued to grow, I just threw the idea to our deacons, and I said, hey, we need to make sure whatever insurance stuff is covered. And if I can get your guys' stamp of approval, I would love to have this kind of come under the umbrella of First Baptist and allow for the co-op to meet at the church. And there was really just support, of from the beginning. And it's
is awesome.
Yeah, it's been really great and an incredible thing. Even just seeing how the church has embraced that as a part of what we do as a church in this community has been really neat.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. So I'm going to hold that thought for just a second. But you guys moved to this church kind of in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we did.
So interesting times all along with that, and just that embrace of your church by the community. Was that kind of a shift from the mission of the church before? Or were you continuing and building upon what was there?
Yeah,
being so community and outreach
a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Right. The church had been greatly impacted by COVID. They'd also been impacted by a lot of leadership transition. And it's a really old church in that it turns 171 this year.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So churches have history, and so there were a lot of factors coming into the church to go, hey, what are we about? What does the Lord want us to be? Like,
people
what
were
does he call the
searching
church
for
to do, right?
ready for something
Right.
really
So
good,
what's
right?
next?
Yeah.
Right. And so there were a handful of really faithful saints that were ready for whatever God had next. And so we came. God uses the man or family really to accomplish his plans and purposes. And so we just by the grace of God, landed there and were able to jump in with them. And COVID, is an interesting time because I think a lot, I know this is more on the church side, but I think it forced a lot of churches to evaluate where they were, what's important. And then we were able to kind of strip some things down because of that. We were forced to stop some stuff and then evaluate, hey, what works in our context? And so that was where our church was at. It was really ripe for that and ready to go. Weston's a unique town in that there's always something to do. You go downtown right now, they have A-frame signs on every corner, and it shows you all the festivals that happen throughout the year. There's always something to do. But for many years, Weston was not like that. It's been revitalized, and it's become one of those cute tourist kind of towns with festivals and shops, and it's got all the restaurants and the bars and all the things that you can go to. And so there's just lots to do there. In a town like Weston in the 80s, the church became the entertainment for the community, right? So they would put on events, right? And so things just looked a little bit differently. And so this is one aspect of how we are being for the community is through this co-op, by seeing a need in the community and going, we can meet that need by allowing our facility to be used, right?
Just
and the church really
open-handed with the
embraced that.
resources that you've been blessed with. I think what you just said is so encouraging because it wasn't just churches, right, that had to reevaluate what they were doing. I think it was a weird time, and I can't believe it was 4 years ago. It feels like we've been, but it's something that I think a lot of people want to just move past, but I think sometimes it's good to process it because I know my husband and I, as a family, we kind of did what your church did. We stopped, everything was kind of stripped away, and we were able to kind of intentionally decide, what are we going to add back in? What's going to make a difference? Like, what are we going to prioritize? Because everything was just kind of laid bare. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in doing what you're saying and evaluating. And then what can our church do? What can our family do that's really going to make an impact, that's going to make a difference in the lives of our own kids? And then also like looking beyond. And I think that's so important in the homeschool community. I think sometimes we can get into a bubble and want our homeschool community to only be the homeschool community. Right. But it's so important, right? Like we've got good news. We've got great kids. We've got a lot to offer, to pour into people. So I think it's really cool that you guys aren't just doing that as a family, but they are bringing others along with you. So what are some of the ways, or what has been the response of the congregation as they've seen you guys live this out in your lives and bring other people in?
Just overwhelmingly positive. We have a couple of different activities that overlap when our co-op meets, and so people from our congregation are able to see just the life being breathed into our church by having 40-something kids, in our building, loud and crazy and doing science projects and baking bread. And you can imagine the craziness that ensues, but everybody's having so much fun and parents are involved in helping. And we were talking about this earlier today, and that one of our really close friends, a member of our church, saw one day, she was just walking through the fellowship hall in our church, and she saw just parents helping their children, and she said, wow, like this is how it should be done, parents pouring into their kids. And it was just like a cool moment because they are not a homeschool family, but for her to see something happening like that in
the
our
beauty
church.
of it,
Right. And so I mean, just overwhelmingly positive.
We also we have these events throughout the year. We'll have like Christmas concerts, and some of that is we still do the singing at the nursing homes, and so but then the kids also have an opportunity to sing for their families, and so and we have a real mixed bag of, we have public school, we have private school, we have home education, right? All of that. And what's really neat is we invite members of our church to come to we have homeschool showcases is what we call, like we have a showcase, think like high school science fair, right? They've got their booths set up and they're presenting all the stuff that they've learned throughout the year, but they also sing, and we have a big meal, and many from the church come to this. And we've got folks who are they're teachers at the school,
Yep.
right? The public school here in town, or they're on some kind of faculty and staff. They'll come out because they want to see, what's going on here, or they've got family members that have chosen to do home education, and so they're coming out and watching their nieces and their nephews. And what's really neat is to just see all of us operate with the differing, convictions and choices that we've made regarding school, but like come together and have them see that and embrace that. And it's been really neat to just witness that as well.
Yeah, that is really cool. And so you touched on this, like that. It can be really tricky, I feel like, to talk about education in our churches and within the body of Christ at large. And I've been talking about it a lot on the podcast because it's so hard to navigate. And I think we all want to do it well because it's something that is so personal, right? Like I really, even if you're right, even if you guys are telling me the right thing to do with my kids, I don't really want you to tell me, even if we agree, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's just so personal, and we have such strong convictions about it, I think, as Christians. And we've got dear friends at church who have very strong convictions that their kids should be in the public school. We have friends who are very convicted that private Christian school, and we all love the Lord and are seeking to do the best in his will for our family. So how do you, as a pastor and pastor's wife who have kind of taken a stand for your family, but how do you navigate this within your church?
Yeah.
You do it.
You're passing this one off on him.
It's really interesting because coming into a small town, that was one of the first questions I asked. Before there was a boom in home education, we were already doing it.
Yeah.
And so COVID honestly did not impact our lives in the same way that it did many others because we were already in it, right? Everybody was homeschooling for a while.
Right.
There for a season. And so, but for us, it was just another day. The only difference was Dad was home a lot more.
Right. We kind of had the same experience. Our daughter was in preschool, but I remember having just it solidified our conviction, I guess, because she was doing preschool on Zoom, or someone would come in with the sniffles and they would all quarantine for 2 weeks, and we were like, "You're 4, like we're good," But it really did kind of give us a glimpse, and so our lives weren't just totally upended like some people's were, but just that sense of like, this is the direction.
Yeah, that's, it's really funny. So we were talking earlier about not having a context for homeschooling. And I was always really supportive because I love my wife.
Yeah.
But I did, and I had to confess this to her a few years ago during COVID, was that I always kind of had it in my mind that eventually when our oldest was school age, she'll do it while he's in preschool, but he'll go to school and she'll go back to work, or whatever. And even on in to the COVID, when I was suddenly my job description completely changed, right? I'm putting together like online services. It was a whole thing, but I got to watch her operate in her calling, right? And her giftedness. And that for me, we had conversations for years about how we homeschool because we have certain convictions that we see in the Bible that lead us that direction.
Right.
But there was still a part of me that I think might have been holding on to, well, maybe,
The familiarity sometimes is hard when it is such a foreign thing. Sometimes that's hard to let go of because it's hard to step into something that we don't know or understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was COVID that changed it for me because I got to see it, right? I get the highlight reel when I would come home. But now suddenly I'm here and I'm involved. And I'm finding myself going, well, maybe I'll just take a break and go hang out with them for a bit, and involve myself in the process. So COVID
which is really sweet and a good example for dads, maybe, if they're feeling uncertain, like step in and see what your wife is doing all day. I mean, I realize it's not always moms who are doing the schooling, but most of the time. And, I think that's a really good example that it's good for us to see each other as couples. And, he saw you shine, which really the Lord used to firm up your own conviction, right?
Yeah, now I can't even imagine, right? Like, I cannot imagine doing it any different. And so I mean, that really ties in too, because what's really amazing about Aiming Arrows is not just the co-op itself, but the resource that it's become. I can't tell you, I've had countless conversations with dads who have said, like, my wife has come to me and she wants to homeschool. Yeah. And I am not on board. Convince me,
which is
right?
a common story a lot of times, and I don't know if it's just because moms are, typically caring for kids in just a different way than dads do. That I think
there's definitely a nurturing
research.
thing there.
It seems like a lot. The wife will kind of lead into it, and then the husband comes along. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have those conversations quite a bit because of that. You know, and we understand that there are differing convictions. And by God's grace, you know, we have a community in our church where people fall on the spectrum, and they've made the choices that they've made for the education for their children. But we've become quite a resource. We mentioned some of the events we do. Well, one of the events that we do is kind of an informational event. What we'll do is we'll have kind of a smaller version of a showcase where we will present what the co-op is, and we invite in anybody who's reached out to us who are curious about home education. And so we share from our perspective and our vantage. And I'll even sometimes, like, I'll share a short message on just like, hey, here's where our biblical convictions come from.
Kind of a theology for education, which a lot of us honestly have had to develop kind of on our own. Like, I don't remember it ever being talked about, but I think with everything going on in our culture, that's so helpful and such a great idea. Yeah.
And even for myself, I'm a pastor, right? And it took her coming to me with the theological conviction for me to go, I need to dig further because I think I've missed something here. And so we'll do that. And we also too, like, we are a resource, like we've had folks come to us and say, hey, I have concerns. We've, you know, about things that we're hearing about within the government public school, you know, system. How do I approach this? And so we have those conversations, more of a one-on-one discipleship counseling kind of way. We've also done it in group settings too. We've done Bible studies where that topic has come up, and we've had that discussion in the room with public school educators, you know, and say, well, hey, let's look at principle.
Ricky? How do you broach that?
So we look at principle, right? Yeah. So what has God called us to do? Like, we have a duty and a delight in making sure that our children are educated from a Christian worldview. And so many of the conversations that I've had is if you make the choice to send your children to a government or a public school, just understand that I think the Bible teaches us that education is discipleship. And so when your children are being educated from many different worldviews, perhaps, in a public or a government school, that means you can't come home at the end of the day and put your feet up. Right? You have a duty now to unpack 8 hours of a worldview that's been taught to your children before you can ever get to the foundational truths of our faith and start building upon that.
There's a lot to unwind, right?
Yes.
And I think
kids are so forthcoming, right?
Yes,
because you'll be like, hey, how was your day? It was good.
It was fine, right?
Yeah,
they're not going to give you. Yeah, I mean, that's something my husband and I talk about a lot is that, you know, if we do kind of an analysis of the amount of time that I would spend, you know, volunteering at our kids' school, you know, whatever that looks like, if they let you, even sometimes they won't even let you now. But that time and then the time on the ground in the evenings to just kind of figure out what they've talked about, what they've learned, to help them unlearn it, to replace it with, you know, we are spending far less time educating our kids at home than what we would feel we needed to do to disciple them. And so I think that's just something that we haven't been led to talk about or think about deeply. And so I think it's awesome that you guys are doing that and giving people something concrete to hang on to.
Right.
And because people I think are willing to think it through, right? Is it kind of a relief sometimes?
Yeah, you know, the conversations have always been, we've actually been in the room where it's felt very contentious at times. But the Lord has diffused it through like just an understanding of, you know, if we have this duty and we delight in this duty, you know, we need to take that serious, and we need to evaluate the discipleship process of our children. And so when I've explained it like this, I'm like, you know, home education has allowed for me or for Autumn and I to be on a drive on a random Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. and for my son to look out the window and say, hey, look at that cloud. And for me to go, isn't it great that God made the clouds?
Yeah.
And then suddenly I'm having a scientific conversation through theology proper, right? I'm looking at God and creation, and I'm able to have that conversation and teach about different types of clouds and how God's hand was intricate in that, right? And so And so when you have it from that angle, I've noticed that a lot of people, the wall that they put up and the defense they put down kind of comes down and they go, actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, and we haven't seen a ton of change from that necessarily, but at least it's planted seeds for them to give, heavy consideration to the reason that we do this is because of the blessing and the benefit that we see in the spiritual formation of our children.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we have a long list of probably like 20 different reasons.
Yeah, we keep it on our fridge.
On why we homeschool. And the first reason on our list is discipleship.
Yeah.
And, just reiterating what Ricky was saying, that can be done through any means of schooling. We just see it as a best fit for our family for home education, but that's not to say that discipling your children can't be done through any sphere. And I think if we look at it through that route, then
it just means you have a lot more uphill work if you're not with your children.
We kind of joke that we're kind of just not lazy, but like we see this as the path of least resistance to get to that discipleship that we want, because we're not undoing. We are able just to input,
start from the foundational level,
build up.
Forward.
And
our children too are not unfamiliar with the culture.
Correct.
Right, they are in it.
Yeah, that's a misconception, right? That our kids are super sheltered. And
so it's like we are introducing concepts to them at age appropriate levels, but also because we are homeschooling our children, they're in the world much, much more.
Right.
And so they're seeing a lot of the culture shift.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're able then to tackle that head on. Right. So if they see something that's like, wait, that's not the way God designed for that to be, we're able to say, let's have a conversation about that.
Right now.
Versus, if something goes on in a school and you can't pry it out of your children, they've stewed on it for 4 months before they finally come and say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, I have a question about something. So I have this, thing that happened at school that I've been thinking about since April.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, man, I wish you would have came to me in April so that you wouldn't have, in your limited understanding, developed your own thoughts. But instead, we're tackling it head on.
Yeah, we love that too, Ricky. And we are honestly shocked at the things that we're talking to our kids about, things that we wish we weren't. But we're also just so thankful that we're the ones that are with them, and that we can tackle those from a worldview perspective. It's amazing the culture we live in. And I think that that's one thing that is important, that as homeschoolers, we communicate well, because we're not just keeping our kids in a bubble. It's something where we're just walking through life together. And it's really beautiful.
And we can be
I love that. That's a good way to put that.
Yeah,
we're walking through life together.
Yeah, and we can be in the driver's seat and sort of introduce those topics. Maybe it's not something you see, but, maybe something you foresee coming up. And you can start having those conversations, at an age appropriate time or whatever.
Just when it's natural and makes sense, and you know the kid, and when it's going to be right. Yeah, I think all of that is just so encouraging. And so we need to wrap up, but you had told me, Autumn, and I don't know who wants to tackle this, but because you guys have been so open with your community, and people coming in because of your co-op, because of just the general involvement that you have with your community, that you have had some unique opportunities to interact with the public schools in your community as a pastor and as a church family. And so tell us a little bit about that, because again, the goal is not to separate ourselves out, right? It's to constantly be shoring up and then pouring out. Right?
I think a lot of that just stems from our mission statement at our church of being for the community. And we early on wanted to set up a relationship. Actually, when we moved to Weston, our oldest child hadn't started kindergarten yet. And so we had done a couple of years of pre-K at home, and then he was going to be starting kindergarten when we moved here. And so it was just something that we naturally wanted to create a relationship with the school, but also with businesses in town. It wasn't isolated to the school. It was just something we wanted. We wanted to create. We wanted FBC Weston to be known as the church that you can go to if you need something. We just wanted to infiltrate the community. And we talk about this kind of tongue in cheek, but Weston is a town where it's a small town where there's a lot of fun stuff going on. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel like Ricky was talking about, like churches, maybe like in the 80s had to. There's a lot of fun stuff already happening, and so we just involved ourselves in those things. We just started patronizing the businesses. We've met great friends just by going downtown and going to those businesses, and then creating this relationship with the school. They know that Ricky is a resource that they can call. They've had him come out to the school a couple of times for bereavement, when they lost a student, when they've lost a staff member, just for children and for staff to come if they needed like an extra person to talk to. But they also know that we're a resource for events that they have. If they need help buying things, we are always the church that they call. A couple of times a year they have a mental health awareness week, and they always call us and let us know, like snack wise, what they need to set up for the kids. And so we just wanted to cultivate this relationship of we're somebody that's here for you. And and
it's provided a lot of wonderful opportunities, and the school is very much aware, that we choose to homeschool, and so.
But that doesn't make.
But it has, it's just opened up opportunities to have wonderful conversations about that and build relationships in the community and just being a resource to them.
And we do have several members of our church that work for the school, so it never felt forced or anything. It was just, hey, we're here for you, and they were glad to accept what we were offering. So
and I think if you have established clear convictions that you're grounded in, and you can state that case, which that would be an encouragement I would give to homeschool families. Know why you're doing it. We could go through all of the reasons of why maybe you choose not to go the public school route, but more importantly, know why you're doing what you're doing. And so that's been a huge help for us. It's like, okay, most of the response we get are okay.
Yeah,
like,
I think that's such good advice, because a lot of times we can put kind of a negative spin, like we're against. I think that's easy to get in the habit as homeschoolers, because there are legitimate things to be concerned about, but far outweighing that are all the wonderful things that we've talked about together that top the list and make it beautiful for other people, so that maybe they would want to join us, right? And what you said, just be willing to share that. My dad has always told us from the time we were little, be genuine, honest, and sincere. And I think you can't go wrong with that, right? People generally receive genuine, honest, and sincere well, even if we feel differently. I think it's awesome. You guys have been such an encouragement. As we wrap up here, just one final thing that you would say to homeschool families who want to pour into their communities. Do it. Just jump in, right?
Jump in, do it. Involve yourself, in your community. Don't isolate yourself off from it. In some ways, we have a unique opportunity to be even more involved in our communities. Yeah. Because homeschool gives you so much schedule freedom.
Yeah, flexibility.
Right? And so, so take your kids to the local coffee shop and hey, make it a math lesson when they go buy their scone and you get your cup of coffee, right? Involve yourself. Yep. In Weston, our kids are pretty well known by many of the shop owners. Yeah. And so they engage with them, they talk with them.
They love to go into shops by themselves and pay for things.
And the socialization even of that. Like if you want to use, my kids are really good friends with the people at Hy-Vee that run our deli counter. We exchange Christmas cards. We've talked about things that they need prayed for. It truly, like we say it kind of in a silly way, like, we're going to go see our friends at Hy-Vee, but truly what you're saying is just be part of the community and don't stay home all the time. Right. Be out there. Let people enjoy your kids. It's such a light, right? That we can shine.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you guys, I'm so glad we got to meet. I hope that this has been as encouraging for everyone listening as it has been for me, because truly I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, this has been great.
So,
thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for being here. And for everyone else, I hope you'll join me next week for the next episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.
Heart and Soul Homeschool is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the host and guests and not necessarily the views of the Herzog Foundation. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.